a preparation to sufferings for the gospel of Jesus Christ, a Christian exercise full of comfort and consolation for these present times. Surely he spake not ill that said, how Christian exercise consisted in two things, to do well and to suffer much. For God will be glorified not only by our actions but also by our sufferings, by which we manifest our virtue and zeal as much or more than by our actions. And so the Holy Scriptures persuade us the rather to acknowledge the importance of these duties, in that they so often exhort us both to the one and to the other. Our Saviour Christ also was not content to give unto his disciples necessary instructions for well living, but further he premonifies and forewarns them with a careful advertisement against the diverse assaults and combats they were to suffer through the hatred of the world, encouraging them to the fast hold of constancy under the assured hope of eternal salvation, the which he doth expressly by these words here, you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that holds out to the end, the same shall be saved. In these words he does not apply himself only to the apostles, but in their persons to all the faithful, the which he notifies by declaring that the subject of this hatred shall be the profession of his name, as we are in like manner advertised in other places, that by many afflictions we must attain to the kingdom of heaven, Acts 14, and that all those which will in piety, according to Jesus Christ, must suffer persecution, 2 Timothy 3, the which the faithful have so clearly proved to be true by experience, that we need not confirm it by examples. Christ says not simply, you shall be exposed, but which is more, hated. For there were many sects of philosophers which contradicted but not hated them. And in the faculties and sciences we see doctors dispute one against another with much passion and zeal, both in speech and writing, and yet without violence. But as for the faithful, Christ saith unto them, you shall be hated. And as hatred is the source and spring of the wickedest affections and actions, of envy, choler, detraction, injury, exprobation, persecution, and cruelty, so in affirming that we shall be hated, it intimates unto us that the combats and assaults which shall be urged upon us by the world are of no small difficulty. For what pernicious design is there which hatred doth not nurse? What outrage does not that enter into? What is it fed and sustained withal, but with ruin, blood, and slaughter? Her throat is an open sepulchre, Romans 3. She useth her tongue fraudulently. Under her lips there is the venom of the asp. Her mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Her feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery is in her ways. She knows not the way of peace. And questionless to the end, we might not suppose how this hatred of the world against us is but slight and trivial. Jesus Christ describes it unto us to be so cruel and implacable that, getting the mastery of the senses and changing reason into rage, it will violate all humanity, all respects and bands of nature, and with more horrible and tragical barbarism, imbrue her hands in the blood of her nearest allies. For the brother shall deliver up his brother to death, the father the child. The children shall rise up against their fathers and mothers, and cause them to be put to death. And in respect of others, what will she not attempt? She is so furious that she will destroy provinces, put cities to the sack, and whole estates to ashes, under a passion to set therein on a flaming fire the church of God. She will make the fields and rivers look red with the blood of the poor and faithful saints, and fill the world with cruel inflictions, with prodigious massacres, with horrible murders of an infinite number of innocent persons, without any detection of just crime, without regard to sex, age, or condition. She will omit no fraud, malice, perfidiousness, nor perjury. She will hold for a maxim of conscience to make conscience of nothing. esteem it for an article of faith to keep no faith at all, under pretext of religion to manifest nothing but irreligion. She perverts not only the will, but the understanding, and makes frantic and mad. For, as when a great fire is kindled, it sends up on high a gross thick vapour, in like manner, when this hatred is inflamed in the heart, it sends up into the intellect understanding an obscure and duskish fume, which doth obfuscate reason, and, taking away the true use thereof, makes a man degenerate into a savage and cruel beast. And though we see not this hatred always to break forth in bloody effects, it is because God, who by the invisible chains of his omnipotent power hampers and shackles the malignant, depresseth them, so that when the enemies of the Church permit her to live in some quiet and repose, and do not openly persecute her, it grows not through the defect of will but of power. This hatred is then no more extinguished than the heat of the coal under ashes, or the venom of a serpent congealed and mortified by frigidity. She is always living in the world, and when she openly discovers not herself, she sets and covers, causing matters to hatch upon all occasions, whereof these present seasons yields us a lively proof and testimony. And which moreover may seem more strange, Christ says not unto us, You shall be hated of some special men, but of all, that is to say, of all such as do not receive the verity and purity of the gospel. This signifying that we should not have a part, but the whole world exasperated together against us. And though this be divided into different affections, factions, and religions, and that one nation is an enemy to another, and that there are likewise some which magnify themselves in the title of Christians, yet they will ever appear in this point to hate us. They will unite to dissipate us, and assemble to work our extirpation. So the Pharisees and Sadducees accorded to oppose themselves jointly to Jesus Christ. Herod and Pilate, who were enemies, grew reconciled to crucify him. And even so the kings of the earth, though in their estates they have contrary designs, yet will they take the same counsel, the same resolution, and the same correspondency, to favour Antichrist and to persecute the children of God. So as the accord of the world is nothing but a conspiracy against the Church, and peace amongst the wicked nothing but war against God and his saints. The occasion of this hatred against the faithful is the mere profession of the name of Christ, although oftentimes the pretext be otherwise. For they which live out of this holy profession are so far from being hated of the world, that on the contrary they are beloved and cherished, the world permitting them to live in all licentiousness and excess. For if the faithful would imitate them in the error of belief and perverseness of life, the world would change the hatred they bear towards them to all favour and love. It is a very strange thing that this name of Christ, so sweet and amiable, should be so odious, this name more odoriferous than spread perfumes, this name, which is not only a good odour in the nostrils of God, in himself, but also for us, making all acceptable to God which we present unto him, our prayers or affections, our works and our persons. But as we say that the tigers enter into rage upon the scent of any aromatic drugs, so in like manner the world becomes stark mad upon the very odour of the name of Christ. By this name diseases have been cured, the deaf have heard, the blind have seen, the dead men have been raised up. By this name wicked spirits have been expelled, hell hath trembled thereat, death was destroyed, God appeased, paradise laid open, and all believers saved. This name is venerable among the angels, adored of the blessed, exalted above any other name that can be nominated in this world or in the world to come. To this name every knee must bow, both of those above in heaven, of those on the earth, and of those under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus is the Lord, sitting in glory with God the Father. This is the glorious name by which and for which all things were, all creatures subsist, have their being, their life, their operations, and their good. and yet nevertheless it is hated of men, after the custom of many barbarous nations, who at the rising of the sun shoot their arrows against it with 1,000 maledictions, because they do but feel the ardour and heat of it at high noonday, not considering that without the benefit of his beams and virtue they could not live. And even so the world shoot the darts of their hatred and madness against Christ, who is the Son of righteousness, when they apprehend but the ardour of persecution, or else supposing that Christ brings with him some inconvenience, whereas indeed he is the true Son of all happiness, and that without his light and special grace there is nothing but darkness, misery, the shadows of death, and death eternal. Persons empoisoned with this hatred against the name of Christ are of two sorts. Some be those which make no profession at all of him, but openly detest him, as pagans, Jews, Turks, and miscreants. The other have some knowledge of him, but yet they are erroneous Christians, mingling the word of God with false doctrines, superstitions, inventions, and human traditions, such as be the heretics and adherents to Antichrist. And though this latter sort and their believers avouch not publicly any hatred to the name of Christ, yet they show it by plain and evident effects, as Saul before his conversion persecuted the church of God, though his intention and meaning was no way such, and which is much to be lamented, deluded and abused Christians show oftentimes more rancorous and implacable hatred against the true faithful than those people themselves which hold the gospel in abomination, and suppose they bear a great zeal to Jesus Christ when they persecute him in his members, and that they offer an acceptable sacrifice unto God when they put his children to death. If it be wonderful, therefore, that this name of Christ is hated of men, is it not likewise a very strange thing that true Christians should be hated one of another? For, though they have the most principal rights in the city of this world, yet are they entreated as strangers. They love all the world, and all the world hates them. They seek after peace, and everyone makes war against them. They are detested of their enemies, and yet they pray for them. They are the honestest men of all others, and yet are persecuted. Then the most wicked sort. They live in the flesh, and yet not according to the flesh. They converse on earth, and are citizens of heaven. They submit themselves to laws in their obedience, and by their holy life surmount and excel them. Others curse them, and they bless. They are punished and tormented as malefactors, and men would not have them confess and acknowledge who they are. Their good names are slandered and depraved, and yet we are enforced to commend their integrity. Mortal enmity is put in practice against them, and no just reason can be rendered thereof. Men are ignorant of their profession, and notwithstanding condemn it. In a word, look what the soul is to the body, the same are the faithful to the world. The soul is dispersed over all the members of the body, and the faithful over the several parts of the earth. The soul dwelleth in a body, yet is not of the body, and so the faithful dwell in the world, yet are not of the world. The soul loveth the body, though the body war and contest with it, and the faithful love all the world, though all the world be opposite to them. The soul is enclosed within the body, as within a jail or prison, and yet she preserves the body. And the faithful are imprisoned and shut up in this world, as within a prison, and yet they preserve and support the world, by reason that for their sakes God forbears to destroy it. And when the number of the faithful is accomplished, then the world shall end and finish. The soul is incomparably more excellent than the body, and the faithful of infinite more value than the world. The soul is of heaven, and the body of the earth. So are all the faithful heavenly, whereas the body is wholly earthly and terrestrial. The immortal soul dwelleth as a stranger within our mortal tabernacle, and so the faithful have but a travailing life in this corruptible world, attending most blessed and happy immortality. The soul, being deprived of bodily delights, is made the better and more perfect, and so the faithful, rudely entreated by the world, do profit the more in the exercise of virtue. From whence proceeds it then that they are so hated of the world? Why, from this, that they are not of the world, for if they were of the world would love them, because everything loves its like. But in that they are distinguished and separated from the world, by the profession of the gospel, which a doctrine so sweet, amiable, and healthful, comprehending and exposing the promises of the grace of God and of life eternal, propounding such sacred and admirable mysteries, such perfect and divine instructions, how comes it to be thus hated? First, in that the world is ignorant of it, for those that truly know it cannot but love and embrace it, and so of violent persecutors they many times become ardent and zealous professors. The reason of this ignorance is, because it is altogether spiritual and celestial, and the world earthly and carnal, which cannot believe, nor apprehend it by reason of the sublimity and excellency thereof, no more than the beasts can be capable of the discourse of reason. To which purpose the Apostle affirms in the first to the Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, we propound wisdom to the perfect, a wisdom no ways of this world, neither of the princes of this world, which come to nothing. But we propound the wisdom of God, which consists in mystery, that is to say, hidden, which God has ordained before all ages for our glory, which none of the princes of this world have known, for had they known it, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. But, as it is written, these be things which the eye never saw, the ear never heard, nor that never hath entered into the heart of man, but God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit sounds all things, yea, even the profoundest matters of God. For who is he amongst men that knoweth the very things of man, but the Spirit of man which is in him? No man in like manner knoweth the things of God, but the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of this world, but the Spirit which is from God, to the end that we might know the things that are of God. For these things to it seem follies, and it cannot conceive them, because they must be discerned spiritually, but the spiritual man discerns all things. And indeed, being extremely vain in all his cogitations, his opinions erroneous, and in his understanding and will clean perverted in matters of religion, he takes darkness for light, falsehood for truth, and evil for good, no otherwise but even like to those whose taste is depraved or stomach alienated, that delight more in gross and bad than in good and wholesome meats, or those who, having some bitterness lying on their tongue, find the very honey itself to be bitter in their mouths. Moreover, the gospel manifesting unto man his misery, his sin, his infirmity, and his impotency, he puffed up with a conceit and presumption of himself, abhorreth such a doctrine. And which further grieves the same also, this condemns sensual and carnal affections together with worldly reason, commanding a renunciation of oneself and of the world, and man is loath to leave the love of these things. It summons also to the endurance of persecution and diverse things that are odious to the flesh, so that, affecting to live at his ease, he expels and drives away such a gospel, which disturbs his worldly repose and the enjoyance of his delights. Now, though the Lord hath absolute power over all creatures, yet did he not abolish this hatred of the world against the faithful, from whence he works many benefits for our good. For it is like a bar or rail which separates us from the world and the vices thereof. For if the world did not hate us, but rather loved us, what would come of it, but an adherence and confirmation of ourselves to it, and so to be infected with the contagion thereof? Whereas, hating us, we are thereby constrained to withdraw our hearts and to alter our affections from it, that we may be preserved from the corruptions thereof, and aspire to a better estate than that of the world. While Jacob beheld the affable visage of Laban, he took delight in it, but when Laban changed his countenance, then he spake of returning into his country of Canaan. While the children of Israel were not hated of the Egyptians, they dwelt willingly in Egypt, but after they came to be hated and ill entreated, They had a desire to depart to possess the land of promise. While the world smiles upon us, we return reciprocal contentment to it. But when it sets countenance against us and makes us feel the sensible effects of her hatred, then we call to mind and desire our celestial Canaan, whereof God hath promised to us a full possession. Furthermore, God makes use of the world's hatred as of a whip wherewith to scourge us when we fly out too far and abandon ourselves to the corruptions of the world. For then God looseth the reins to this hatred, and permits them the execution of their malicious designs, as in this troublesome time we have had experience through the wonderful excess of our sins and transgressions. Besides, this hatred is a proper means whereby to exercise our virtue and constancy in the trial of our faith, patience, charity, perseverance, and benignity. It is also a proper subject to us of spiritual victory, for where can any victory be without combat, any combat without opposition, any opposition without an adversary, or any adversary without hatred? The hatred of the world must erect unto us spiritual trophies and triumphs, and the purple of our glory must be of a more lustrous and resplendent dye by the effusion of our own blood. For if the Church were not hated of the world, what wonder were it, though it subsisted and persisted in the world, surmounting and trampling it under? And how should we come to acknowledge the miraculous aid and succour of God, the depth of his providence, power, and protection? Should we ascribe that to ourselves which proceeds merely from him, and take that to our own happiness which is derived immediately from his grace? But when God works a subsistence to his Church in the very midst of all the world's hatred, it is no less to be wondered at than when it was preserved in the midst of Egypt and Babylon, among the most truculent and bloody adversaries she had, and as when she was retired within the ark, she was secured amidst the waves, winds, tempests, and storms, within a floating and frail residence. And if it be an admirable thing that this universe should be maintained, being environed with such a contrariety of elements, surely it yields no less cause of astonishment that God still preserves his Church in the midst of hatred, contradictions, and worldly assaults. Yea, the words of our Saviour enjoin us to this observation, that we should be so far from flattering the world or seeking the approbation thereof in any point that toucheth and concerns religion, that clean contrary we ought to have it in continual jealousy and suspicion. And besides this, it is not proper to the Church to be applauded or exalted of the world, but rather to be molested and persecuted. And the peculiar property of the children of the world, as the devil their father, is to hate, whereas the property of the children of God is to love, the whole law of God being comprehended in this one word, which is to love God and our neighbour. From whence you may clearly discern how far remote those of the Roman Church are from Christianity, being stuffed with passion in all their censures and with hatred in their designs against us, reputing themselves the more zealous Catholics, in that they hate us, and their charities likewise towards us being extremely cruel and hard-hearted. For out of the love they bear us they put us to death, they persecute and burn us, out of a love to our salvation. Whereas we, on the contrary, seek peace and concord with them, so far as the duties of religion or civility in conversation may permit. But if Christ, though he were glorious and omnipotent, suffered himself to be hated of the world and of the enemies to his gospel, let us learn to admire and imitate his patience and clemency. And when the world crowned him with thorns, can we look to be crowned with flowers? If they crucified him, will they glorify us? We affect conformity with him in his beatitude. Shall we disdain to follow him in his persecutions? And whereas the name of Christ is so holy, his cause so just, and our profession so authentic, what greater honour can be conferred upon us than to suffer for so worthy a cause? Like unto the apostles, we must rejoice that we are found worthy to suffer for the name of Christ, and that with St. Paul we may vaunt and glory in our tribulations. For besides the honour we receive in suffering for the name of Christ, the reward we expect therefrom is incomparable. For he that perseveres to the end shall be saved. It is not said, he that hates, that returns like for like, that seeks revenge, but he that endures, which is as much as to say that perseveres, that suffers, that undergoes. For if there were no further question but of just repelling of an injury, many wicked men might have as great a part in salvation as the honestest men that are. Moreover, Christ will have his gospel averred not only by the voice, but even by the crosses and afflictions of the faithful. For then only we manifest our firm belief, when the torments of the world cannot shake our credulity, nor the profession thereof which we make. What more infallible testimony can we yield to the word of Christ than by our endurances? What more authentic subscription than our blood? What more sure seal than our death? What more solemn satisfaction than the sacrifice of our bodies? In this warfare he performs most of a man, that utters the least part of a man, and thereunto we are summoned rather to suffer than to act or execute. The very words of the text are herein more remarkable, in that they properly infer the sustaining of a heavy burden, or else some assault or hot combat, all which implies how such endurances for the name of Christ are both hard and heavy. They are intimated to be no less in the word of the cross, which was a marvellous painful torment, and by the burning furnace, wherein we are tried and purified, as gold and silver is in the fire, so that, if we mean to make profession of the name of Christ, we must be prepared and resolved not only for light and easy temptations, but for those most extreme and terrible. And because Jesus Christ saith, he that perseveres or endures, he gives us herein to understand how it is not enough for us to sustain one kind of affliction, but generally and without exception all those wherewith it pleaseth God to examine and try us. For some would willingly pass over a little contempt and scorn, but not an open ignominy; others the loss of goods, but not of their lives. But without reservation or exception of any trials, we must persevere and suffer to the end. This word also signifies to suffer with courage and magnanimity, for many endure, which cannot be said to suffer, being vanquished and overcome, yea, even overwhelmed with the burden, being overcome with the violence of the temptation, or of the contrary shock and force. He is therefore properly said to sustain or suffer that supports and endures, without abatement of his courage. And therefore patience is here recommended unto us, one of the most necessary virtues for a Christian, for it helps to preserve all the others, which without this would fail and prove defective. It is patience that bridleth our affections, appeaseth our passions, moderates our violences, sways over our temptations, reduceth errant reason into the right way, establisheth the soul in her proper seat and residence, and confirms her in her offices. There is not a greater misery in the world than not to have patience in time of misery. Without patience the least inconveniences are insupportable, and with patience those most extreme made light and easy. And as the pearl in dirt causeth its beauty to appear, so a patient man in adversity makes his virtue to shine and appear. But in that excellent beginnings are altogether unprofitable without a final prosecution, Christ saith not simply he that endures, but he adds, even to the end. For to what purpose is it to have begun a work well, and then to give it over? To have run well, and then lie down in the midst of the race? To have fought at first valiantly, and cowardly at last to yield? To have passed the danger of the waves, of the tempests, of gulfs, of rocks, and of pirates, if we perish hard by our port, and sink within the channel? Wherefore we must add perseverance unto patience, which is the end and the accomplishment both of patience and all other virtues. For what comes of patience without perseverance but a shameful revolt? And what honour shall the other virtues have, except perseverance crown them, which, conducting them to their last period, makes them victorious and triumphant? Wherefore let us sustain even to the end. This end is chiefly that of afflictions, and not such an end as the sense or feeling of our flesh, and our own proper affections could desire, but such as it pleaseth God to give us. For it is not lawful for us to shake off our cross, nor to shrink from under the burden which God layeth on us, but resolved, undergoing the same, we must attend while God dischargeth thereof. Secondly, by this end is understood the period of our temporal life, for it is not enough to have sustained for a long time, we must support even to the hour of death, which is the coronation of our life. And certainly, in that the end of this life is short, and the number of our days cut off, would it not be a wonderful cowardice, if we should not persevere and endure to the end? But how can we do this when our infirmities are so great, and our endurances so difficult? In the first place, this must be done by a serious renunciation of ourselves, and of all other earthly things, which will be of no power nor force to shake us, if we condemn them, and be absolutely dead to the world. Next of all, by a constant faith in God and in his word, which assures us that his Spirit will ease in our behalf our debilities, and his power will take place in our infirmities. And he will not suffer us to be tempted above our strength, but he will renew our force, and gives us a good and happy issue of our temptations. Finally, by zealous and continual prayers unto God, of whom they shall be heard, as he in his wisdom shall find it most expedient for his glory and our salvation. For prayer does fortify faith, it supports hope, inflames charity, confirms patience, increaseth all other virtues, it expels sadness, banisheth fear, comforts afflictions, easeth vexations, mollifies torments, reneweth forces, makes the courage invincible, it surmounts temptations, gives victory to all opposite assaults, and remedy to all inconveniences. Why should we then doubt, or what need we fear, relying upon such pursuant aids, and being further encouraged by so fair a recompense as that of salvation? For whosoever perseveres to the end shall be saved. This promise is not like to those which men make one to another, or captains to soldiers, which oftentimes prove frustrated without any effect, or by the death of soldiers and captains, or else for want of power and goodwill. None of these can make void or frustrate the promises of Christ, to them that persevere and endure to the end. Not death in our own persons, for it leads us to life, nor death in the person of Christ, for it is immortal, nor want of power, for he is almighty, nor of good affection, for he hath suffered death for us, testifying therein an infinite love towards us. In a word, we must not call in question the verity of his word, for that is infallible. Furthermore, this promise is not of weak or slight importance, for it intimates unto us a deliverance from an extreme misery, which is from eternal death and damnation, to the horror whereof we are naturally subject, and from which it hath pleased the Lord to redeem us, out of his wonderful goodness and mercy. For if men rejoice so much for escaping some eminent or great peril, or for being preserved a little while from death, which nevertheless is inevitable, what a joy should possess us for our liberty, and escape from eternal death and perdition, and to be preserved from the same forever, considering the small number of those that shall be saved, in respect of them that shall perish. Whereas unto this benefit there is also annexed an assured possession of eternal beatitude, the which Christ also infers, saying, Whosoever perseveres to the end shall be saved. If he promised a life of many hundreds or thousands of years in this world, men would make great esteem of it, especially when it were exempted from all molestations, sadness, grief, infirmities, and all encumbrances, but accompanied by joy, contentment, health, power, and security of estate and condition. But much more also were it magnificent and glorious for the enjoyance of great wealth, and many dominions of a flourishing kingdom and famous empire, replenished with whatsoever the eye, the ear, or the heart could wish. And Jesus Christ promiseth much more unto us than all this, saying, He that continues to the end shall be saved. For what can be comparable to this salvation, which in all circumstances is most absolute and perfect? The place thereof is heaven, the continuance thereof is eternal, the constancy thereof is subject to no mutation, the possession secure and certain, the nature of its benefits are incorruptible, incomprehensible, and divine. Their number infinite, their degrees eminent and supreme, their measure immeasurable, and their purity without taint of evil or corruption, for they are all absolutely perfect, holy, and blessed of God. The peace thereof is without molestation, the glory thereof is the glory of the Lord God Almighty. How different then is this salvation from a frail and transitory life, which is nothing but a shadow, devoured and swallowed up in miseries and mortality. A life which humours, griefs, and inflammations consume and extenuate, which the air makes sick, which meats surcharge, which abstinence weakeneth, which sorrows waste, which passions disturb, which cares do wrinkle, which poverty abaseth, which old age bends and makes crooked, which torments overwhelm, and which a lamentable death doth finish. A life assailed with a deluge of evils, wherein there is no firm station, where we can scarcely see one poor branch of the flourishing olive, whereupon the fearful dove may for a moment fasten the foot. A life affording the same residence allotted to unclean beasts, and the same light which the very worms of the earth enjoy. How far, I say, more excellent is the state of salvation than this present momentary life, where no necessities press, no annoyances disturb, no apprehensions molest, no miseries approach or draw near unto, but replenished with happiness and beatitude, where life is without death, joy without sadness, youth without old age, peace without trouble, light without darkness, abundance without defect, good without evil, security without danger, and felicity without end. This salvation is so much the more to be desired, in that it completely comprehends the happy estate of our whole persons, that is to say, both of the soul and body, which Christ signifies in saying, "He that continues to the end shall be saved." For otherwise how can we be said to be saved, if we might also be said to be lost? And Christ coming to save that which was lost, and absolute and entire man being lost, must he not likewise in his entire and absolute estate be saved? For what a defect were this, when Christ, having assumed our entire person, he should have redeemed but the moiety thereof. If he were but our half-Saviour, and that by him we were but saved in part. And who doth not see that the justice of God requires the presentation of whole man, and as in the one or other part he hath participated of good or evil, he hath his share in the retribution both in the one and other part. But how should this come to pass, that this very body dissolved to ashes, atoms, and elements should return to its former frame and composition? O man, he that reviveth the dead, and that calleth things which are not, as if they were, cannot he give life after death, and repeal it from ruin and destruction? If he created it when it was not, can he not repair it when it hath once been, especially when creation is a greater work than reparation, and to make more than to restore? If he hath made of earth flesh, and of flesh earth, can he not of earth reduce it to be flesh again? For to him whose will was to create, can anything be difficult or impossible? Though this work exceed beyond measure the order and power of nature, yet do not think that it surmounts the power of the author of nature, who by a virtue and power supernatural gave being to nature, and who can, when he pleaseth, exceed the bounds of nature, through the infinity of his power, which is comprehended within no bonds nor limits. And if thou dost but contemplate nature herself, and the several parts of this world, high and low, mayest thou not discern examples of the great power of God, which may be unto thee as images and figures of thy restoration? For, but lift up thy eyes to heaven, mayest thou not see the sun, who after he hath run his course, and is spent after the manner of a death in the west, no otherwise than as if it were extinguished, he returns again to appear, and seems raised up in the east, with the resplendency of his former lustre, the ornament of his beams, and the brightness of his light, and by his alternative absence and presence, dost thou not see the day die in the night, being buried in all its parts in darkness, and then again to renew and revive with clarity, beauty, grace, lustre, and ornament, causing his death to die, which is the night, and opening its sepulchre, which is the darkness, living till night by a continual and indefatigable vicissitude, succeeds it and brings it change, giving an end to it, as before it received light from the same. And do ye not behold the innumerable company of lights celestial re-lightened, which before seemed quite put out, the twinkling of stars revived, the light of the planets renewed, and the wanes and increases of the moon re-established? Moreover, by the remotion or approach of the sun, who does not perceive all seasons to return with their qualities, forces, and virtues? Winter with his colds, humidities, and rains, the spring with its beauty, sweetness, and flowers, summer with its heat, siccity, and drought, who likewise discern not the leafless trees to reassume their verdure and ornament, dead plants to re-sprout, withered herbs to re-flourish, and corrupt seeds to revive? For that which thou sowest cannot quicken before it first die. A most wonderful thing, that nature should destroy to preserve, take away to restore, ruinate to maintain, corrupt to revive, and consume to augment, and that things by her defeated should be restored, made more beautiful and abundant, the which thou mayest evidently see in the wheat, which being laid in the parts of the earth, as in sepulchres or graves, after it hath putrefied, it comes up again much more rich and plentiful than before. And to say the condition of all things in this universe is renewed by their loss, and suffer a falling away for their further reparation, so that all these ordinary revolutions, these mutable and rowling orders of things, are nothing but testimonies and intimations unto us, and as it were a delineation and draught of the resurrection of the dead, the wonder whereof God hath rather expressed in his works than declared by his ministers, by his power rather than by his word, and by nature rather than by prophecy, that so thou mightest be made more fit for the doctrine of faith, being instructed by the experience of this world, and so thereupon they should resolve and firmly believe that he will likewise re-establish thy person, for as thou seest, he re-establisheth all things. Wherefore then should we fear either the destruction or endurances of this body, seeing it must be restored, yea, into a glorious estate, conformable to the body of Jesus Christ? Why should we fear the hatred of the world, which cannot exceed the respects of this world, nor be any obstacle to the accomplishment of our salvation? Let us persevere unto the end, for he that suffers to the end shall be saved. So as there is no temptation that can shake our constancy, neither the cruelties of oppression, nor the perplexities of pain and anguish, nor the rigour of persecution, nor the hardness of famine, neither the ignominy of nakedness, or the horror of peril, neither the fury of the sword, nor the miseries of life, neither the violence of death, nor the force of all the creatures joined in one. But by reason that in this general hatred of all men against the Church we perceive the wrath of God kindled against us, because of the extremity of our sins, let us acknowledge them in their horror with a detestation and renunciation of them. Let us lament with a profound contrition, in sighs and tears, imploring God's mercy to the end that, his indignation ceasing, he may stay the power and fury of such as hate us. And let us be comforted, in that if we are hated by the world we are beloved of God, and that as we cannot love God and the world together, so both God and the world cannot jointly love us. If we ought to endure for the name of Christ, it is freely given us not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Though men make war upon us, yet can they not take from us the peace of God, nor the peace of our consciences. If we be deprived of our earthly commodities, yet shall we not be exempted from the treasures of heaven. we may take joyfully the being stripped of our goods, and choose rather to be afflicted with the people of God than to enjoy for a time the delights of sin, esteeming opprobrious for Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt in respect of their remuneration. If we suffer any loss of the body, we shall find gain of the soul, and that is a good return, when we lose for to gain. For in these losses the spirit profits and purchaseth incomparably more than the flesh loseth. If we be put to trial by banishment, why all the earth is the Lord's, and though we should be dispersed into the most savage deserts, yet should we not be separated from God, nor lose the privilege of being citizens in heaven. If most violent adversities assail us, the endurances of the time present are not comparable to the glory to come. Our light afflictions, which do but even pass overhead, produce in us an eternal joy of a glory super excellent. For if in this transitory world we see a number of men expose themselves to the extremest hazards and perils, be it out of a thirst after glory, desire of riches, be it for ambitions, quarrels, or the wars of their princes, should we refuse to suffer for God's cause such things as others suffer for mere worldly respects? If we be urged to imprisonment, the Spirit of God will enter in with us, to give us consolation, and to reside with us and in us. And though the prison were like the devil's house, yet by the Spirit of our God and by the efficacy of our prayers we may be able to assault and subdue him in his own house. We shall put him to flight to the greatest profundities of his depths, as an adder or snake, who, being pursued, betakes himself to his hole and concavity, keeps himself in, folds himself up in his twists, hides himself and dares not appear. We shall send him from the prison to his hell, from the jail to his place of torments. And it need not be hard for us to be sequestered from the things of this world, seeing we are but strangers to the world, and in that the world is worse than a prison, for the prison hath no such darkness in it as that of the world, which blinds men's understandings, neither are there any such strong bonds as those of the world, which do so hamper the soul, nor so evil sense as the odours of the world, which are stinking affections and infected corruptions, that defile both heaven and earth. It holds not so many wicked ones within the precincts of it as the world, which comprehends them all, neither expects such terrible judgment as the world, which shall hear the sentence of eternal condemnation. To conclude, if the prison hath darkness, ourselves be light in God. If bonds, we are free in the Lord. If odious stenches, we are a good odour to God through Jesus Christ. If we are found guilty, we are justified before God. If the judge be there ready to give judgment, we shall one day judge as assistants with Christ, and judges of all the world in like manner. For if a Christian out of prison renounceth the world, how much being in prison ought he to do the like? And what matters it, what he is in this world, seeing he is out of the world? And although he is being enclosed within a prison, for are not all things open and at liberty to the Spirit? Who will not forbear to break through roofs or vaults, when in spirit he may take his free carrier, glide up to heaven, and make his happy sallies even into paradise? That even as they that descend into a deep and dark well, they see there at all times the stars of heaven, so likewise the faithful in the deepest obscurity of the dungeon fail not with the eyes of faith to behold the glory of the heavens, and the radiant light of God's countenance, which brings replenishment of joy. And then, questionless, may a man be said to have lost his earthly condition when the spirit is ravished up into heaven, for the body then hardly feels any misery when its soul is with God and converseth with the blessed. But if in being released out of prison we must endure death or martyrdom, Christ will be benefit and gain unto us both in life and death. 2 Timothy 2. If we die with him, we shall also live with him, and happy is that death which brings with it life, and opens unto us the gate of immortality. And further, it will be much glory for us to set together and cement the church of God with our blood and ashes, And if this death be outwardly odious and ignominious, we do but in it condemn the dishonour of the world, we being for the name of Christ annihilated in worldly honour, calling to mind how Christ was first crowned with thorns before his glory. He did first climb the cross before he mounted up into heaven, and nailed thereunto between two thieves before he sat at the right hand of God his Father. If this death be painful, our soul shall be victorious over all bodily torments by the divine virtue of our Lord, who out of his dear love, transforming us into himself, will make us incompatible, even as he hath done many other zealous and constant martyrs which have suffered in their bodies, as in strange and different flesh, who, without astonishment, beheld their bodies all on a light fire, their entrails hanging down, their members burnt off and falling down piece by piece, and their lively flesh brought to dust and ashes. By their heavenly notes they have drowned the wind and rumours of the flames, and by the ardour of their zeal vanquished that of the burning fire, and in the midst of fire-hot coals, as if it had been upon a bed of flowers, they have joyfully exalted their happy and blessed souls. Whereunto may further be added, that the more cruel and tormenting our kind of death is, so much more excellent and eminent. Here the text breaks off. A Preparation to Sufferings for the Gospel of Jesus Christ, by Pierre Du Moulin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.